Hello, everyone. Hello, Linda. Hello, Sharon. It is such a joy to be with you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
Being with you is really so thrilling and exciting for me because I know there's so much you have done and experienced as a person who has worked in the field of past life regression in the life between lives work. And I'm thrilled for us to talk about all of it, the journey, the experience of where you are now, what is exciting to you now. But maybe we can start with what was that moment of falling in love with the divine, with the mystery of life that got you to say, this is what I want to do, this is the process I want to guide people through?
Well, good question, Mira. I'll see if I can make this story kind of short, and I apologize. It's an allergy day. So for me, and different in some ways than some of my clients come in, I often say two flavors, and I'm one of those flavors. So the two flavors are, there are some people that have been spiritual since they were children and, understand soul and guides and that sort of thing from childhood onward. That's not my story. I'm the other flavor. And that flavor simply means that I fell into this awareness, this mystery, as you call it, when I was well into my adult years. So long story made short, about 30 years ago, when I was in private practice as a conventional psychologist, I had a very dear colleague die, a man in his early 30s. Sad from a human standpoint. That's absolutely true. And when he passed, I started having spiritual experiences that I had never, in my conscious awareness, had before. And so that long story made short is that I could tell he was around me. I could sense his communication. And he began to show me scenes of past lives that we had shared. I wasn't even sure, honestly, back then, if I believed in past lives. And so I began to have these intuitive spiritual experiences. And, for anybody who's had any experiences like this, we know at the sort of core of ourself, it feels very real. And we really, in a major way, don't question it. So I was having these experiences, and I decided to explain this to my husband. We'd been married 25 years probably at that point. We had never talked about soul, reincarnation, past lives, anything like this. So I asked my husband to sit down. He knew my colleague. They were golfing friends. And I told my husband what was going on, and he looked at me really calmly. And I said, why are you seeming so calm? Don't you think this is strange? And he said, no, actually, I don't. And I said, why? Don't you think this is weird? And I'll just insert that Earl and I have always been very liberal people from a social, political, open to new ideas kind of standpoint. So I said to Earl, why don't you think this is odd? And here's what he said. He basically said, when he told me that when he was a boy, that he remembered his past lives spontaneously in detail. He had to basically repress that for whatever it would be, 30 some odd years. He had repressed that awareness, but he said he never questioned these lives. He knew they were real, but he never told anyone because, he was worried that they'd think he was just this weird kid in the neighborhood. So basically, Mira, that's what happened. He just said, look, if this interests you, go for it. He's not a psychologist. He's an academic in the field of political science. And but he was very supportive, and that was a great blessing. And so I just, I had to learn more and find out what is soul and why do we come into body, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what happened.
Truly incredible. And is that how you discovered the work of Michael Newton? Is that the road you took in applying all of this and finding a way to work with your clients?
Well, my road started first with past life regression. Yeah. And so I read everything I could put my hands on about what we call past life regression. I took training in past life regression. And then a few years later, Michael Newton's first book came out, 94, 95. And I just happened to come upon his book. I was fascinated. I reached out to him. We ultimately became colleagues. I trained with Michael, and began guiding, beyond past life regression. I began guiding what Michael Newton calls life between lives, and what I call between lives soul regression. Yeah.
Yeah. Truly incredible work. And I would love to hear I would love to hear some more about the between lives part of regression. We've been speaking a lot about other lifetimes with other people we've interviewed, but this in between is so exciting and so rich with guidance and information for people. I would love for you to share on that.
Okay, happy to do that. Well, first of all, I'll just say that it's a little confusing when people think of that term, life between lives or between lives. And someone who's never had that type of regression often asks me, well, between what two lives, Linda? What does that mean? And essentially, and Mira, I'm sure you know this yourself, it basically means that in guiding a regression, once we move through a past life to the point of the ending of the past life, of the dying in the past life, then between lives soul regression is following and supporting the client as the client crosses over at the end of that past life. And then the client basically connects with their higher self, their guides. They essentially elevate from third dimension through fourth or through the astral plane and connect at the soul level, which we would call fifth dimension and beyond. And then we learn all kinds of soul level details about the client.
Yeah, this totally resonates with me because I've had the experience of having the life between life regressions. And in addition to meeting my council of guides, one of the most interesting pieces that I picked up is that I learned the name of my soul, and it stayed with me, and it came in a very interesting way. The person was already guiding me out of the experience, and I said, wait a minute, I have a name. I have to give you a name. And so I've named my business that name because it's been such a guiding light with everything, right? So, and when I research it, I found some old records of some person of Irish descent, and that was the only thing I've ever been able to figure out, right? And so it's not a name that I would have ever even thought of. So yes, I'm really on board with the value of those soul pieces that we pick up. Yeah. And I imagine people come out of that experience much more deeply connected with themselves, right?
Right. I often, Mira, I jokingly say to the client in the interview and the preparation for the regression, for the between life soul regression, I often, in a supportive way, say, be careful what you wish for. And I don't mean that in any kind of a threatening or sort of nefarious way. I mean that because what I find happens for the client is they learn details about who they are as a soul, why they're here in body, where they've been before. They gain information that is more than they likely thought they would receive in a very positive, benevolent way. In a between life soul regression, the client brings approximately 5 questions they wish to ask their spiritual guide once we're at the soul level in the regression. And I tell them, these can be any questions. It absolutely, nothing's off base in terms of the question. And often what happens is the client receives answers to their questions, but they learn even more about why they're here, what their unique skills are, what are the reasons they struggle with certain challenges in current life, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
So sorry, go ahead, Mira.
Please, yes. I'm hugging the conversation, so please.
I know, yeah. I wanted to ask you if you find that you do that more rather than doing the past life or the normal therapy route.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first, let me just say briefly, while I used to be a normal therapist, I don't do conventional psychotherapy anymore. Not that isn't valuable. It's just not what I was guided to continue doing. So I do a type of spiritual counseling for people, but I don't do sort of conventional standard psychotherapy anymore. But the answer, Sharon, is yes. What happens is when people reach out to me and want to schedule a regression, and they learn about the two types of regression that I guide, they'll either, well, it varies, but more often than not, the client will say, once they understand the breadth of the details that can come forward in a between life soul regression, which includes past life anyway, most people opt for a between lives regression. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I loved my two experiences, or three, but one of them took 6 hours and it did not feel like 6 hours at all. And I got to meet this group, let's call it group of doctors that work through me, which was really cool. It was unbelievably cool. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Go ahead, Mira. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Not at all. I really love everything that you shared, and I wonder if you would be willing to share what was it like working with Michael Newton, and what was it like being bold enough and brave enough as a practitioner to say, and I'm going to bring my flavor to all of this, right? Because I really admire that you went beyond what that was like as an experience with him, right?
Yes. Okay. So lots of pieces here. Let me see if I can remember all these thoughts that are in my head. First, just for clarity, just so the listener understands this, when I guide a between life soul regression, it's scheduled for 3.5 hours. And so, some people might have a 6-hour session but I don't guide 6-hour sessions. And so I don't want people to think, oh, that's the length of time or even the cost of a session that long. Yeah, Mira, that's a really interesting question you asked. So when I met Michael Newton back in the late 90s, late 90s, Michael, if Michael was alive, he was about 15 years older than I. So he would be now in his early 90s. So Michael was in his late 60s when I met him, and he'd been doing this type of work for, as I'm sure you know, for years. He didn't write books or teach this work to anyone else until he'd probably been doing life between lives, what he originally called life between lives spiritual regression. He'd probably been guiding those kinds of clients for 35 to 40 some odd years. And so when I met Michael, he was just beginning to train other people. And so he talked to me about that, and he said, I really would love to have you come take the training. And I mean, I was fascinated. I was completely fascinated. And so I trained with him in the very early stages of him training people. And then ultimately I became involved with the board of the organization that we built together. And then we expanded the training even more, and it became, a much more in-depth training. And I think this is what I'm about to say, Mira, I think is true for anyone who trains in any kind of a spiritual tool, but in this case, between lives soul regression. we have to put our own stamp on it. We have to put our own energy on it, because if you have 5 people guiding between life soul regression, or whatever, whatever term they're using, they're going to be led, the regression therapist is going to be led to learn and to learn about soul level details they're meant to learn about, and the clients they're meant to work with are going to be guided to that person or that other person. And that's exactly what's happened to me over the years. So I started guiding between life soul regression in the very late 90s. And what I found is my guides started working with me to bring certain clients and certain expanded information with the clients that I worked with. And I always like to say, Michael Newton is the grandfather of this kind of work. But those of us who trained, following Michael doing the work, we're the next generation. So we've added on all kinds of additional information, understanding. My challenge, actually, just say this briefly, is as I became fascinated with understanding past lives and the soul, then it was like, okay, this is the work I want to do. And then for a certain period of time, I fought, probably I'd say as much with my left brain as anything. I fought with my left brain about, oh, well, I thought I was going to be a conventional psychologist the rest of my life. And back then, most of my referrals came from medical doctors. And I thought, oh, these medical doctors are going to think, Linda Backman lost her mind. But I couldn't help myself. I was way too fascinated. And today I know, and our guides do this for us. Our guides give us this fork in the road, and then we have free will, and we choose in many ways during our lifetime, current life or past lives. We choose, which of these 2 forks, which direction we're going to go. And I had to go down the spiritual soul level avenue. Yeah.
Because of this personal experience, do you feel that you attract people to you who are also working to navigate their own personal expression, their own authentic being in the world?
All the time. And that's part of the value and purpose for regression work, is allowing us access beyond our awareness of our human self. And both of you, I'm sure, because of the work you both do, this, allowing us access to not just, to use myself as an example, not just who am I as Linda in this body in this lifetime, but what else does my higher self, my soul self, and do my guides want me to do with my current lifetime? And then we make the choice, because one of the unique qualities of human incarnation is free will. So no matter what our life contract or life agreements are, we have free will to choose. And sometimes the hardest choices are the most beneficial choices. So, yeah.
I have a question for all 3 of us. That it's just a thought that crossed my mind. But since we're really connected on a higher level, of course we're all one, but before that, there's soul groups. I'm wondering if the mission, let's call it mission, that you and Dr. Newton took on, if that is of a similar, have you ever had an encounter or something that has made you think that you are in the same soul group as that, I'm just wondering for myself how that works. And maybe I'm just wondering if you've come across it, or maybe if you've thought of it.
Yeah, I'll kind of give, this was one of the topics I was going to try my best to insert in our conversation today. And
Yeah.
Sharon, that's a perfect avenue. I'm sure you were guided to ask that question.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me see if I can make this as simple as I can and not make it overly complex. So early on, I'm trying to think of how to make this simple, because it's hard to sort of just, not exactly, yeah, it's hard to make it simplistic. Yes, of course, what Newton discovered, that I've rediscovered over and over and over with clients, is that as a soul, we belong to a small group of souls that are the souls with whom we've had the most lives. And Newton called that a cluster group. I like to call it a soul pod, because I think a soul pod's a little more explanatory than the term cluster group. So here's the thing. Yeah, you're totally welcome. Here's the thing that makes this even more fascinating and broader. So some of us, this has all come forward through my regression clients, over all these years. Some of us as a soul, when our soul was new, or we might say when our soul was conceived, we were designed as a soul to incarnate primarily on Earth, to incarnate and evolve lifetime to lifetime to lifetime on Earth. And that's what we think of as karma, free will choices that weren't the most useful in the past that we can balance, and dharma, which a lot of people don't think about. And dharma meaning, what did I learn? What skills, what capabilities did I gain in past lives? So that's dharma. And there are two other types of souls that might come to Earth. The other two, one is an interplanetary soul. That's the term I was given in regression. And for listeners, they can exchange that term, interplanetary soul, for starseed, ET soul. I simply was given the term interplanetary soul. What that means is it's a soul that was created to not regularly come to Earth. That soul gains their evolution somewhere else in the universe, somewhere else in the universe. And if and when they come to Earth, and some do, they come to Earth because that interplanetary soul has gained a relatively high level of wisdom and evolution, and Earth needs their advanced perspective. They don't always find it easy to be in body, because an interplanetary soul doesn't necessarily have experience functioning repetitively in these kinds of bodies that we have as humans on this planet. So that's an interplanetary soul. And then lastly, there are souls that at times come to Earth that come from the angelic realm, that come from that angelic realm that serves divine wisdom. And people need to choose their term. They could call it God, the source, Great Spirit. Kabbalah uses the term Shekhinah. There are many different terms, but think about the divine guidance of Earth. There are souls that support and carry that energy of love and compassion. That's their signature energy. And at times they come to Earth. So I've worked with all those different types of souls, and each of them have different skills and abilities as well as challenges. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Fascinating. I didn't think of dividing that into these groups, but it's so obvious and clear that that's what's happening. So I'm glad you brought it to the forefront of my thoughts. Thank you.
And talking about these, yeah, please.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll ask afterwards.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just gonna ask if there are characteristics or some ideas that you want to put forth that are general way of recognizing. I think it's obvious when you meet an angelic being, you know, because you just kind of melt. I do. But maybe you have some preconceived, or not preconceived, but ideas about what their character is like, or what comes through first when you meet them.
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, if my client that I'm just meeting, let's just, say I've not met the client, I know little or nothing about them, and I'm meeting them to do the interview before the regression, I often get hunches about my client, like, oh, in my head, my, self-talk. Oh, I think my client's an interplanetary soul. I never speak that at all until the regression's over, because I don't want to bias the regression. But to your question, Sharon, so an interplanetary soul, some of the signs and indications of an interplanetary soul, of course, great wisdom, of course, kind of great wisdom. Sometimes they are deeply intuitive and have known that since they were kids. Always very skilled in one way or another. It could be music. I mean, it could be music. It could be something very straightforward as carpentry, or, it can be anything. Often an interplanetary soul, what I call an IP soul, will struggle with certain kinds of health and emotional challenges. They'll struggle with allergies, digestive disorders, sometimes to the point of autoimmune illnesses. Again, because they're not used to working in these kinds of bodies.
Right.
Sometimes they're diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. And this can be extreme, like you might say 2 standard deviations from the norm, or it can be more moderate and not so extreme. One other just quick piece about interplanetary souls: they are often people that have been fascinated with astrology, the night sky, things that we might call sci-fi, because they come from somewhere else in the universe. So those are the indications often of an interplanetary soul.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
I just have to ask the question, how about angelic beings, right? Any indications there?
Yes, I mean, and that's a little slightly more difficult to pigeonhole, but angelic beings have this core of love, compassion, and acceptance of all people that is just different. I mean, I'm not an angelic soul. Am I not, of course, at times loving and compassionate? Yes, I hope so. But it's not the core energy that, if you know me, it's not the core energy that I lead with. Oftentimes when you meet an angelic soul, at that deepest part of them, it doesn't come, it's so hard to explain. It doesn't come across as naive, but it does come across as, why don't people treat each other like everybody matters, that everyone's needs matter? And if someone wrongs you, you excuse that, or you let that go and accept them. So it's just a deep core of respecting all people.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's my experience as well with both of these groups. And I just want to say for the audience that I wouldn't want anyone to pigeonhole, like you said, or put them in any other person in a box. But I just wanted to see what comes across, not that I want people to really judge, or say, okay, this is this is that, because it's so individual. But thank you. I agree with everything you said. I have the same experience.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you mentioned your husband, and I'm going to bring him up again because I'm truly amazed by the connection the two of you share and how he was also there to support you in a moment of really a fork in the road, a big moment of deciding your own evolution and growth. And he supported it in such a perfect way, right? As if his soul was prepared for being there for you. I would love to hear some more if you have figured out the connection the two of you shared through other lifetimes.
Mhm.
Anything you can share, because I have to tell you, I come from a personal place where I have dedicated a huge chunk of my life on working on relationships. So when I see somebody I admire, I want to be like, well, teach me. I want to know more, because I bet you it's automatic between the two of you, right? It's normal and natural. So anything you can share.
Yeah, I mean, part of me wants to say, "How long do you have?" Which that I'm teasing, but well, I'll just say, Mira, okay, it still surprises me even now, 30 years later, that this is the work that I do. Obviously, as you just said, I'm very supported by my husband. Part of it is where we are in our life age-wise. My husband spent 30 years as an academic, as a professor and administrator at different universities. So for many, many years, he had his own career. And then ultimately he left that career, and administration is his love. So he basically runs our business, and he loves to do that. He's equally as spiritual as I am, but that surfaced slowly but surely beginning 30 years ago. But so I'll just say, Mira, to try to make this kind of simple, because it's not very simple, but Earl and I are both earth-based souls. So we're both souls that, we're designed to come to earth. We know a lot about our past lives. Of course, they haven't, I want everybody to know, I mean, both current life and past lives have certainly not all been perfect. But we know a lot. I mean, we have past lives that go back into pre-crucifixion times. We know about those lives, even to the point of, I'll just say this very, very briefly. When my husband and I met, it was a blind date. I'm going to leave out a lot of details, but we met on a blind date where we were not even 20 years old. We met on a blind date, and then I was invited by my husband to go on another date a week later. And during that week, in between the first date and the second date, I had what doctors thought perhaps was appendicitis. Of course, we ended up going on more dates, or we wouldn't have been, married this long. But long story short, that was, I learned many years later that it was really never appendicitis. I didn't end up, having surgery or anything like that. What surfaced between those first two dates was a memory of a past life where my husband and I were betrothed. This is pre-crucifixion. We were betrothed, and there was an underhanded plan. My husband was a military person in those days, and my aunt did not want me to be in relationship with this senior military person that was the soul of my husband of today. And my aunt, in the past life story, arranged to have my betrothed killed. And where I was having pain in that supposed appendicitis was the part of the body of the man that is my husband's soul where he was stabbed.
Wow.
I didn't understand any of that, of course, for years and years and years. So that's just an example of what we know about our past lives. Yeah.
Yeah. I have two questions for you. That's an amazing story. I love hearing these stories. One question is, do you do regressions with two people at the same time, like a husband and wife or sisters, brothers, whatever? And the second question is, I would like to know more about your center.
About my center. I didn't quite catch
Yes.
what you said. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So honestly, okay. If I'm going to regress, Sharon, if I'm going to regress, two people in a romantic relationship, or two sisters or two brothers, or a mother and a daughter, whatever. Number one, I never regress them at the same time. Number two, I never let's just say it's a mother and a daughter. I never let the other, close friend or family member be present during the regression of the other client, because it concerns me that it would bias what the client receiving the regression would allow to come forward. Like, they're coming upon a past life, and maybe the soul of the person that they know well, family member or friend, maybe just like, I was in great pain because my betrothed died. It would be harder to let that surface if that person's in the room. Right. So I will, of course, guide people that have a relationship with each other, but not simultaneously, and not having the other person observe the regression. Yeah. Yeah.
Totally agree with you. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And then about my center, which years ago, it's a long story. I came to the decision to call it the Raven Heart Center, and that stems from a story tied to when my colleague, the one that died that I've spoken about, at times his energy would show up in my life as a raven. And so it's called the Raven Heart Center. And so obviously my center is my work, and my husband, you might call him the COO sort of. And so I guide both types of regression. I train people in this kind of work, do spiritual mentoring with people. And since COVID, I do all the regression work and spiritual mentoring remotely, just like we're having this kind of conversation today. And it works beautifully. I never might have thought that pre-COVID, but it works just absolutely fine and very effectively. So, yeah.
I have to elaborate on this, because I know many of our listeners will have a question on it. That's something that I discovered as well many years ago. I was working with someone in person. She flew in from Dallas to work with me in New York City. I was living there at that time. And then shortly after, she wanted another regression. And because we had found this place of comfort, she said, "May I please not fly in? Can we do this over the phone?" And only because I have known her and I had this experience, I said, "Let's do it." And it was a wonderful experience. Nothing was any less than in any way. And I want to say this was, 2013, maybe even 20, somewhere around there, right? Forever ago. And she said to me afterwards, "The only thing we got to do differently is next time I cannot hold the phone against my ear." and so that was my moment of learning of, of course, the body relaxes. How are we expecting the hand to keep the muscle tension? And so that was my moment of saying, wait, there's really no difference when the regression is held over the phone or on Zoom or in person. I wanted to bring that up to support that, because it's been my position, now over a decade.
Yeah. Just to add a couple more thoughts quickly, Mira, to that. I think that there are a couple of things that are so valuable. One is that the client gets to be in their own living room, in their own bedroom, they're in their own environment. They might even have their cat laying on them for comfort. And that just works beautifully. And of course, it also means, and I'm sure both of you know this, that it opens up the opportunity for people no matter where they live.
Yes.
Sometimes we have to work with time zones and all that sort of thing, but that's not horrendously difficult. And so, yeah, we're certainly on the same page with that whole idea.
I would love
Yeah.
I would love to keep asking you questions, but I wonder if there is anything else, Sharon, on your mind, anything that you would love to bring up. Yeah.
Well, if we had a few hours, I would want to know so many stories that you probably have to tell us, of interesting regressions that were just fascinating. Can you think of one that stands out that might have been, oh my God, I didn't even comprehend it. It was so big. It was such a wise thing or something like that.
Yeah, I think, gosh, there are so many stories. I'm thinking about a couple of people that I've worked with. One is a woman, somewhere in her 50s, I think. She's an interplanetary soul. She has not been on Earth many times. She's very capable. I think she has 2 master's degrees, and she works in the field of mental health, and she's quite capable. But for years, especially in her earlier years, she carried past life trauma from past lives not on Earth. Now, I'll just say that when I work with a client who's an interplanetary soul, some interplanetary souls have past lives that happen somewhere not on Earth. Other interplanetary souls simply don't have past lives. They may have a few Earth past lives, but IP souls don't always have past lives somewhere outside the Earth. But she had a very traumatic, perhaps more than one, non-Earth past life. And that one of the souls with whom she had great conflict with in the interplanetary, non-Earth past life, that soul incarnated on Earth and was someone in her current life. It set up for her extreme behaviors because of a level of trauma from the past life. In her earlier years, because she was getting intuitive information, she was completely misunderstood and misdiagnosed. And she was inpatient a couple of times in her late teens and early 20s because of the trauma from the past life. And she was misdiagnosed as having psychotic episodes.
Wow.
There's nothing psychotic about this woman. I know her well, and obviously because of my training as a licensed psychologist, I know how to diagnose psychotic disorders. She's not psychotic. So by doing regression to tap back into what happened in these non-Earth past lives, it was like a key in a lock. To understand, and she had to stop having any connection with this particular embodied soul person in her current life, who she'd known from the interplanetary past life. So it's things like that. And, that's the fascinating thing about, and again, both you, I'm sure, know this, the fascinating thing about guiding regression work is I never know what's going to come forward. I'm not supposed to know. It's my job to facilitate, but the client gains the information with my support, and then I help them understand, of course, how to process it. But that's just, one of probably lots of examples. But
Yeah, really extraordinary. I loved hearing that story because I know that will make all of us think, right? All of us. And I wonder if there's anything you would love to leave us with, any thoughts, anything you would like to share as a message, as wisdom, as inspiration, anything that wants to come through your heart.
What occurs to me, Mira, when you ask me that, I'll just say 2 or 3 things briefly. When, as people are listening to our discussion, I think what is so important is for any of us to honor our passions. Because when we honor our passions, it's kind of like me, thinking I was going to be, this psychologist, Dr. Linda Backman, the rest of my life, and thinking it was too weird and woo-woo to go off, down this regression pathway. But, it's almost like, and people can see me on the screen, it's almost like something was pulling me to honor those passions, those strong pulls, because they're coming from our soul level, which maybe that leads me to the last comment. And that would be that we can all intuitively tap into our spiritual guidance. We all, we may not be the most famous channel or medium in the world, but we can all tap into our own intuitive guidance. And that would mean that we're tapping into a spiritual guide. We all have a guide. We're never without a guide. That's my experience of 20 some odd years of guiding regression. And one of those guides is our own soul or our own higher self, not just, so as people seek to maybe further substantiate using their intuition to receive intuitive guidance, please be sure, everyone, that you're not just looking for a soul outside of you, that you're also, trusting you can connect with your own soul level, which is one place where we receive guidance.
Yeah, truly.
The place, I would say.
Yeah, totally.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for everything you shared with us. Thank you for being with us. I really look forward to us connecting some other time. And meanwhile, thank you for everything you've done and continue to do.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah.
It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.